Welcome to Evolutionary Men. I'm your host, Jason Lang. Let's get started.
Jason and I are back today talking about our passion, our deep interest in healing, working with men, working with people who are ready for a more meaningful, powerful life. So we're happy to be with you all, and we've been tuning into something that is part of our lives, and but more noticeable in these last weeks, and that's this experience of stagnation, of being stuck, of kind of, waking up either in one day or gradually and just having this sense of, is this it? Is this, I've followed the script of life. I've kind of done the school thing, or I've gone and got a job. I've, been a good man, trying to do the right things, and trying to live with morality and ethics and give back a bit. And inside, there's a dullness. There's something kind of stuck. I mean, it's not like it's all that way, but there's just this background feeling. And today we want to drop in with that. So, Jason.
Yeah, I think this is, something I've seen come up with a lot of my clients, and I know you've seen come up with your patients, and just this idea of, stagnation, of things not moving and feeling stuck. And I think for a lot of us men in particular, this can be very strong. And, our work these days, in terms of the shadow work we've been leading, a lot of this points to, emotional stagnation, of when just emotional content or residue gets, stuck inside of us and doesn't move. And, I personally think there's a pretty strong link between this type of stagnation, which means, this lack of movement of our emotionality, and a lot of the just like hopelessness, depression, numbness, kind of like iciness that a lot of men I know feel. We've definitely worked with guys, who have come to us and like, are like, I want to be able to feel. I wish I could cry. Like, right, we've heard that before from guys we've worked with, like, but I can't. And I think that's an indicator, a pointer to someone who has that stagnation. It's like that lack of movement in their system. And the thing about this stagnation is it has a huge cost on us as men, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I think for the masculine in particular, stagnation and stuckness are amongst the most painful states we can be in, right? Of like, it's not only am I like suffering or not feeling good, but I don't feel like I can even move the ball forward. Like, I don't know how to get any motion or movement in my life. And then suddenly we feel trapped or stuck in our life. And that is a dark, challenging place for men to be, and something that, we're really trying to tackle in the Heartofshadow program that we run, to give guys an opportunity in a very safe space to begin some of that movement, to go into these challenging parts in themselves. But I was super curious to talk to you about this, Luke. So for listeners that may have forgot, Luke's a doctor of Chinese medicine, and stagnation, as far as I know, is a big part of some of the work you do from that level. And I'd be curious to hear, just from the Chinese medicine perspective, kind of what that is. And then my sense is we can tie that pretty heavily to a lot of the work we're doing.
I mean, the catch-all phrase from common culture to describe stagnation is this idea of stress. And so stress is just one single word that really points to a complex layering of stagnation and stasis, or as we're describing, something not moving. And, we could look at any system in the body and go, well, what happens when there's stagnation in the lungs? Well, then fluid accumulates and you get mucus. It's harder to breathe. You have to cough that fluid out, and it's harder to speak. It's harder to articulate. And that's a manifestation of stagnation at a physical level. Now, you could correlate that to grief, or to being overworked, or to maybe not speaking up. And again, you could look at that in the digestive tract, right? Stagnation of food. Or you could look at that in the liver. The liver is more stagnant. So you might feel, a little bit more cranky, a little bit more irritable, etc. So every system in the body, whether it's the skin, whether it's the fluid systems, the major organ systems, the lymph system, the joints, if there's stagnation in any of those systems, we go from a state of, flow and warmth to a state of initially inflammation. Things get hot, things get agitated. And if that prolongs for a significant amount of time, that area will stop being hot and will become cold, which means you'll lose function, you'll lose warmth, you'll lose life force. And then, the pathway to cold is the itises. So, essentially all of illness originates with some kind of inflammatory condition. In most cases, meaning things heat up. They get hotter than they should be. So it's like having a little fever somewhere in your body. And if that heat prolongs, you get the tissue starts to agitate. It's almost as if you're rubbing your skin externally. If that's happening internally because something's getting hot, then that tissue will thicken. It'll get thicker. We call that fibrosis. So a thicker tissue makes it difficult for blood to flow because it's getting thicker, it's getting tighter, and then the vascular system gets compromised, and you have less blood flow over time. And that's where you would see like a colder condition arising. So when we talk about stagnation, there's a biological process that is correlated with that. And of course, there is always an emotional component, always. And it's not to say that, if you address the emotion, the body immediately gets better. It helps a lot, but
yeah,
if you don't address the emotion, then the body has to adapt to that stored stance that we're taking emotionally. I don't want to feel sadness, grief, my lust, whatever. I don't want to feel it. It's not been permitted in my belief system, in my conditioning. Therefore, I'm going to kind of isolate that emotion from my heart, from my mind, and I'm going to start to create stagnation. I'm going to essentially begin this process of inflammation, and then this process of losing function, eventually losing function. So of course, long term, we're gonna not feel very good, and that's gonna get worse and worse and worse. That's gonna progress in a certain way.
Yeah, it's just blown my mind hearing it laid out like that. And it just makes me think of, this thing I've said before, but now I'm like, oh, there really is something there of, oftentimes, as I've gotten more sensitive to the work, it's like you can look at people and start to see their bodies are taking the shape of what's unexpressed or unfelt or what has stagnated, right? And I think you can particularly see it sometimes in older people. And there's like their body's actually like, it takes like a shape. I have some of that shape in my forehead, like some of my stress lines, like there's something to that. There's a holding there, right? And that this idea that I love what you said, because it's like, anytime we stop an emotion in our body, it takes there's a physical structure, there's a musculature to it, right? And so we're actually stopping, like we're stagnating that energy by stopping it. And, I often think of the imagery with the word stagnation of like a pond that just has no movement, and there's just all the gunk, and it's got like the algae layer, and it's kind of gooey, versus like a stream or something that has that movement, and it's just like crystal clear. The water is working with the rocks and the environment and like filtering it. And it feels so good to get in something like that, right? And I think that's kind of what we're pointing to here in the system of that can easily happen. And, I'm thinking of a man you and I recently worked with that I think had a pretty, honestly, incredible, mind-blowing version of this. Of he had been carrying some tension in his chest for decades, like decades, as long as he could remember. An overbearing, overwhelming tension in his chest. And I believe you had worked with him. He had worked with traditional pharmacology, and it had helped, but it hadn't quite moved it. And in doing some pretty deep work, I mean, he went deep. This guy went for it. Something unlocked in him, and for the first time, really, in as long as he could remember, he felt space there.
Yep.
And that's like, I mean, I'm still blown away. Like when he checks in about that, I'm like, holy crap. This is why we do what we do, because his, felt body experience is very different now in terms of something moved inside of him. He hadn't quite ever had a safe space, I think, to access and move that before. And you and I got to witness that in a really beautiful way on retreat. And it's not always that simple for every man. Like you said, the emotional doesn't always immediately fix the physical, but you kind of have to do it anyway, because they are so related. That I think where a lot of, I work with a lot of guys, I know you do too. And, the stats are pretty fucking crazy for how medicated we are becoming as a society, right? And I'm by no means personally antidepressant. I think it's, the right tool for a certain time and place, and it can be a total game changer. And I've seen it legitimately save men's lives in certain conditions. But then there's like that's it. Like a chronic usage. Sometimes people just you get on this, and then there's no addressing what's underneath. And long term, that in its own way creates some stagnation. A lot of guys I've certainly seen and worked with, and you might understand this better than I, but as far as I understand how most SSRIs work is basically they're taking the range, the window of feeling expression, high, let's say positive, and low and negative, and they just narrow it, right? They narrow it down, which when you're in a very dark, depressive, or suicidal place is an absolute lifesaver, right? Because it brings you to a point of, you stop the bleeding. It's like an EMT coming in and just stabilizing your system. And once you're stable, then, a deeper healing can become possible. But I think that's the step that's sometimes being missed now is guys get on it and they stabilize, and then there's no one to take them forward, right? To take them to that next thing. And then over time, that narrowing itself becomes a type of stagnation where guys are just, they're not feeling high, they're not feeling low, they're not feeling much of anything. And that makes life challenging in a very different way.
Yeah. Yeah, when that narrowing occurs over time, and whatever crisis began the need for an SSRI or an SNRI, abates, and all of a sudden life stabilizes, and there's not the kind of urgency to shore up our chemistry because of some external stressor. Then all of a sudden you find, wow, my well-being is reestablished. There's not an external crisis I need, to be kind of remediated from. And wow, I can't feel, and I've heard men and women say this who are on them once things are better, and the docs just kind of left them on the drug. And because we know it's very difficult to get off of these things, it's very painful and challenging. It's doable, but it's hard. That they find, wow, it's hard to express my love, really transmit my love. And it's actually very difficult to feel that poignancy, feel that grief in a good way, feel my heart cracking open. And I've worked with lots of folks, even doing shadow work, many years working with people who they were on an SSRI, and they would have a certain level of breakthrough, but they themselves would say, I'm not able to get there because there's this blockage. And I know it's because I'm on the Wellbutrin or the Prozac or the Lexapro or the Pristiq or whatever they were taking. And it was only when they got, first thing, they kept doing the work, they eventually started to crack. But then once they cracked and realized, whoa, I can actually face this very difficult emotion that once overwhelmed me. Now I can face it. I do have the capacity for that because I've been held in a container that can guide me through it. Now I feel like I can come off the SSRI. Whereas before, when I tried to do it, I just fell apart. I couldn't manage all of the backlog of feeling that I had been buffering myself from with the drug. And so that's an amazing thing, that this work, it creates an energetic context for beginning to feel again. And of course, that's very scary for most human beings, male, female, on the gender spectrum. But for men in particular, feeling is frightening. It's frightening. And just a quick anecdote: I was working with a gentleman this week who lost his beloved father. Wonderful, atypical, really great relationship with his dad, and comes from a very conservative background. They never said "I love you," but lots of love was expressed in other ways. And he basically was coming to me like, I'm crying all the time, and he was looking for permission. Like, is this okay? Is this the right thing? I'm on this drug and I'm on this drug because, I got to keep it together. And I said, yes, absolutely. The work here is to grieve. It's to feel. And that was essentially all he was needing. And all I needed to say is just for the next 45 minutes, reestablish that, feeling is permissible. This is an okay thing to do. It's not quite what this podcast, we're always talking about that, but in a certain sense, he had a belief, a stagnation, that even in this moment with his dearest father who died, that he was supposed to block that up and not feel it, that was very unmanly. And so it was just a beautiful session, take someone who really believes that macho archetype, and then to say, hey, yes, you need to grieve. You need to do this work. And you'll feel better if you do it, and of course, by the end of the session, how do you feel? I said, I feel great. I feel really good. I was like, good, keep grieving, keep feeling it. You don't have to do it all the time, but when it comes up and it's appropriate, take a moment, cry, think about your dad, talk to him, and it's actually moments like that, when you work with folks that have really been taught feeling is weakness, or like that's not allowed in the ethos of being a man, and they start to get like, no, I need to go there for my health. And then they do, like the gentleman we were just speaking about, and find, wow, this really works. It's so hardening. I know for both of us, when we see a man just start to embrace that this is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, it's part of the I think part of our mission is create a new culture for men to connect with each other in. We cover in our program this idea of the man box and a lot of the conditioning we receive as men, which, yes, says always be tough. Always be tough. A man is tough. And that often translates to don't feel, don't feel, don't feel. And that has an impact on men over time, like we really see it. So then when men don't feel safe to feel, aren't given permission to feel, they have to get rid of those feelings through booze, through numbing out, through porn, through weed, through the many things we've all engaged with in our life in different ways. But it is so heartening to see men being able to step into that, and from across the spectrum, right? It's not just woo hippies, right? When given the right tools, everybody can feel the value of this and the change that's possible when you're just given permission to be and feel. And it's interesting, as I've been sitting here thinking about what you were talking about with stagnation. I'm just spitballing here, so we'll see where this goes. But it strikes me that initial process you spoke to of like, there's an initial inflammation, there's like an initial heating up before like things kind of get stuck in stagnation of like I wonder if that's kind of correlated to emotional reactivity.
Exactly.
Like, so an emotion happens and there's reactivity is a very interesting type of heat or feeling, right? There's like an extra charge to it that often doesn't, if we just go into that, doesn't usually result in the best experiences out in the world. And then if we get stuck in that reactivity, eventually it has pretty negative consequences on our lives and our relationships, and we can like kind of cool off from that. And I think part of what we're trying to work with guys is the reactivity is a signal that something needs to move or be felt or expressed in a safe container, which isn't necessarily the moment that is generating the reactivity or the context, right? Like it's not always appropriate to take the anger I'm feeling with my partner and lay into her, right? What is appropriate though is to honor that there's energy there that needs to be moved in a safe way, which might not be possible with my partner in that moment, but which is absolutely going to be possible in a container or something like our Heart of Shadow program, where we really create the conditions for that movement. And the other piece of this that just sprang to mind of, I think part of the challenge I think we're in is the great thing about things like SSRIs, to take it back there for a moment, is they're very effective in the sense that they don't need a lot of personal care, right? You can just give it to someone and it works to some extent. I think the challenge of why that next step, when someone is stabilized, doesn't always come online is the work you and I have experienced and do is highly personal. It is so unique to each human being, each man in particular in our program, where it requires us developing a type of intimacy with them developing intimacy and trust with us in the group. And in that context, we're often able to find, these incredibly subtle, sometimes not, but oftentimes just like microcosms, these little wild moments that may not resonate with anyone else in some sense, but are so unique to that man's life experience that we can then work that in a way that I just think a lot of kind of mainstream doctors don't have time for, right? They come in, they read the chart, they say 5 things to you, and then they're out. And there's not that time where sometimes, you and I are working with guys for 30, 40, 50 minutes to just kind of set the scene and create that opening, so then there can be that movement that really does release or move some kind of stagnant energy in pretty powerful ways.
I mean, we're filling an incredibly unique niche. I mean, I was thinking about this week. A DBT, CBT therapist, who does this every day. They're working with 3 to 7 people a day, and essentially they're very attentively listening, holding space, offering some reflection, maybe some feedback, offering just an incredibly valuable service to people to have this safe, loving space and trained level of wisdom and insight to offer back to people. And that's not what we're doing. We're not therapists, and we're not offering that kind of work. What we're doing is, and in some ways why we can't do this every day, is it requires so much energy and focus for us to be attuned to every nuance that someone is sharing, their facial gestures, the tone of their voice, the movement of their body, what they're saying, more importantly, what they're not saying, and then to skillfully guide when there's a moment of opening, to guide them into their interior, where all of that hard wiring, those hard nervous system structures live that say, I can't feel, I can't feel my anger. I can't feel my grief. I can't feel whatever energy it is. And then very, very skillfully unlock these places. And of course, that often leads to big catharsis, big openings, which you and I are very well trained in how to handle, how to take people into their trauma in a very safe, trauma-informed way. And very intuitive. We're not taking a step-by-step approach and running people through an exercise to get anywhere. Like you said, we're right there moving with whatever's going to unfold. And we have enough skills to move with you when something new arises. We're not, we work within the context of just flowing with what's there, not, okay, let's do what we want to do with you rather than what you want to do. And that's kind of the magic of, it's not really a method, but how we work. Coming back just to a moment to highlight something you said, what all this conversation is pointing to, and we've alluded to it, is this larger cultural context of what it is to be a man. And to really a huge degree, the stagnation we feel as men right now is an evolutionary challenge. We do not have any role modeling or templating for how to be men anymore. Do we persist with being kind of the macho, all-capable, big-dicked man who can handle any challenge and is impervious to feeling? Or, the nice guy who's kind of evolved to realize, well, that's really toxic. Let me be more conscientious. And when my reactivity arises, I'll just suppress it down, be in my heart, be very sweet. If those are my two options as men, and society doesn't really like either of them anymore, society doesn't really respect the nice guy, doesn't really respect the macho dick, where does that leave us? Do we vacillate between being the macho dick and the nice guy? Is that the new strategy? Like, fuck you, I love you, you're so sweet, get the fuck away from me. Sometimes in our work, if you look at it from a distance, you say, oh, we're training the nice guy to be a jerk and the jerk to be a nice guy, and then somehow some balance occurs. But that's really not what we're doing. And I think at the heart of Stagnation and at the heart of Shadow, our program, we're coming right into that nexus between the two options we have, and we're feeling into this evolutionary push of what are men being asked to become, and we're literally creating a container for that to occur. And I think that's a cool thing for us to riff on here. Is like, when we not just getting the stagnation moving, that's the first part, but then what is it that we're sensing is arising out of that, and that's something that we're seeing in our men's groups, our personal groups, and of course the groups we're facilitating. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah, I'd say it's a frontier, right? Yeah. It's an actual emerging frontier, and it's been so heartening. We just wrapped a cohort of our Heartofshadow a month or two ago, and then our first one 9 or so months ago, and to see what they're creating after us, to me, is what I was telling some of them the other day in a follow-up session of, like, this is what's fueling us. Like, seeing how you guys are continuing to come together and support each other is so inspiring to me, to Luke, of like, wow, because there's something happening there that you just don't see a lot of places, in terms of a level of brotherhood and love and camaraderie and safety, and authentic, like, calling each other forward to be more. That I think is this new frontier that has that open heart, is grounded, is powerful, and has a certain emotional fluidity to it that we have not seen modeled to us, right? I think this is one of the real frustrations for a lot of men I work with, is there is a lot of attention right now on the toxic masculine, right? This idea that, all the evils of the masculine is done. But as my friend Keith once pointed out, like, nobody is talking about, well, what's the positive version of that, right? So what can we replace that with? What is the healthy version of that? There's almost no cultural energy there right now outside of some of these small containers of men's work, I would say, where there is this realization that, yeah, we need to carry something forward. And, I think we're living experiments of that, of what it means to, go into the challenging emotions, to go into the stagnation and learn to move it and then be inspired by it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Because for so long we've been depending on women to fill this emotional gap and have that soft space where, we can come and like be more honest with our women in our lives. And women are in certain ways are like, okay, I don't really want to be that for you all the time. And so then we go to other men and we get a certain kind of relief from men, but largely that culture is utterly persistent. And it's a little tricky sometimes for me. I hang out with you and friends that are like you, and I forget that the default culture is still that way. It has not changed at all. And every once in a while I find myself back in a sporting environment or, with folks who aren't doing much work. And I don't know that I'm shocked anymore, but it's a little bit surprising. Like, are we still animating this kind of stupidity and lack of insight and lack of heart and kind of self-respect? And, the evolutionary stage, this new frontier, it has something to do with love, has something to do with firmness, with intelligence, with kindness, with innovation, with proper boundary setting. It truly is this. It's something I think as men we're all sensing, and at the source of the stagnation, that resistance, is this longing to become something we all sense is possible and is within us already. It's the pieces, the building blocks are there. And in order to develop them, we need to template off of each other. We need to kind of show each other, not necessarily the way, but share with each other our longing to become something more magnificent than we've been. And I think as men, we all want that. We all want that, and we all sense it. And it's by getting together in a group and sharing that longing, that desire to crack, not just open, but into something, more refined and reflective of our deep inner goodness, that you and I are discovering, wow, there is a new man arising on this planet. And thank God, because we are in some ways a leaderless planet. This is a leaderless planet. There are not leaders who are truly creating a future that we want. In fact, it's a caricature of dumbness and stupidity that we see in some ways at that level of politics and pop culture, strongman culture, the utter expression of, diminishing others. I mean, it's ridiculous. And of course, to me, it's like a cosmic joke of, hey, we're here to grow, and let's put like the exact opposite up on that for display, And so that's why for me, our work it comes down to a form of activism. We're doing this not because it makes us feel good, but we think this is the best thing we can do for our species, for humanity to perhaps stay on planet Earth and keep existing. This is where we're putting all of our ducats, because men have to play a part in this. Women are like, all right, y'all, like, we can do what we can do, and we need to carry our part as men and kind of rectify this cultural impasse we find ourselves at.
I think that's so important that, yeah, the argument I make a lot right now is that the world doesn't need less masculine in men, it needs more, but it needs this evolved, healthier manifestation of it that is integrated with the feminine and shows up for the feminine and cares for the planet and each other. And that's definitely a core part of, I think, what inspires us. I also want to highlight, what you were saying about the group, bringing it back to stagnation. I think one of the reasons you and I, we both do some individual work with guys, but the sweet spot we've identified, where to me, it's like, this is the leverage point where the most movement often happens, is in a group. And I think part of that is because as energy moves in one man, it starts to break the stagnation of others. And, I haven't quite found the term for this, but there's, I call it the vortex or the swirl, or that experience we have in a group where one man goes in and moves something and touches something really real and deep. And then that starts to create a momentum, like an energetic impulse through the field that starts to shake everyone's shit up, right? And starts to move thing. And then there's this, we've heard guys say like, wow, I saw him go for it. And I realized, okay, we're not here to fuck around. Like this is it. This is real. We're going to all go in here. And that inspired me to, take on a piece of work or touch something that maybe I'd been afraid of or didn't quite know how to get into. And so the group itself becomes almost like a inoculation against stagnation, because as each man just has a reverberation, it shakes through the other man. And then the whole group is suddenly, it has its own energy and it's shaking everybody up. I'm thinking of those like old parachutes, you'd get in a circle and like move the whole thing up and down. And it's like each man's doing his own little thing. And then it creates a huge wave that reverberates and kind of starts to break up that stagnation. And, I saw this just in one of our groups recently where one man was holding something and it was really intense and personal and vulnerable for him. And he was brave enough to presence it to the group, and it had to do with the group dynamic. And it made that group stronger. It made that group more real and authentic. And it shook up the energy in a way, and it freed even more realness and vulnerability in that group. And it, continued just when we thought like, wow, this group's so deep. It's like, wow, he even broke through a whole nother level. And as you were often fond of saying it, like the shadow work in particular, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And part of why we work hard to set up our groups so they'll have longevity is because of that opportunity to just keep going deeper and breaking up, in a sense, even deeper wells of stagnation, which, we won't get into as much today, but oftentimes we start to hit stuff that's not even just ours. That is our lineage, our fathers, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our mothers, our culture around us, right, as well. In that we start to do this work in many ways that has a real impact.
Yeah. I mean, you said it, the masculine vortex. I think vortex is a brilliant word because it truly is once it's activated, it has its own energy source. And it's perpetual in motion. It's like a flywheel. It's once you wind it up, it can just keep going. It does need to be tended every once in a while. It won't go forever. That's why we set up certain structures around these groups. The masculine vortex is a life tool. It's not a tool, it's an engine. It's a life engine, for your life to work better. And the 6-7 years now going on that you and I've been in the men's group, it has been one of the core engines of my life. Stagnation does not collect in my life, and I have a low tolerance for it. I have a very low tolerance for stagnation. If I start to sense it, I'm immediately tuned in. There's something here I'm not present to, and I can immediately bring it to my men's group. I just know that's where I can bring it. I can bring it to my therapist. I can bring it to some buddies, but my men's group, if I bring it there, it's going to get a lot of light and energy. And honestly, I think if someone would have told me what I was getting, I would have probably invested $100,000 in it. Maybe more, like maybe the cost of a house, because it's paid dividends so much bigger than that, So the value of this, what we know over time, doesn't matter how much money you have. What matters is the time that you have and who you get to spend it with, and the amount of love that you exchange in that time. Whether you're a billionaire or you're making $30,000 a year, you have the same amount of time and you have the same amount of opportunity to love. The money actually is worthless when it comes to what really matters. And this work and the masculine vortex is a container that increases the value of our time such that how we spend it becomes much more meaningful and purposeful. And so, if you're out there thinking about joining the program, I I wholeheartedly encourage you to do it. We work with guys who are very, very wealthy. We worked with guys who have no money at all, but they found some way to pay for it because they sense the value of of their time and their love and how they want to spend it. And this is work that I know the rest of my life I'm going to be offering this work because it's so meaningful. And as I say, as a facilitator and as a participant in it, it does get deeper and deeper and deeper. And it keeps me coming back because I'm always mining something valuable, whether it's within me or as a facilitator. I'm learning more as I work with more folks. There's always something new that occurs in every session we do, something I've never, ever seen or experienced, but I'm totally ready for. I just welcoming the newness, the new gifts that are born out of the stasis, the stagnation that we all inevitably feel in life. That's the great indicator that something new is here to feel and to know.
I love that. And as we start to wrap things up here, we're recording this just around the solstice in 2023 as our year's winding up. And I was doing some reflecting on my year, and I can say hands down that some of my biggest highlights this year were when we were on retreat and working with, when I think back to these were some of the most kick-ass moments of my whole year. And I had a pretty great year in a lot of ways, but I was just thinking about that. I was like, oh my God, that feels so good to just look back. And it was like, that was really time well spent and so precious. And so at this moment, we do have another cohort of the Heart of Shadow coming up. You can always find the latest information about our latest. We do run it multiple times a year at heartofshadow.com. But as we're recording this, we have one launching January 23rd, 2024. And it is filling up. So if you're curious about enrolling, definitely check out heartofshadow.com. There's tons of information on the program, the retreat, everything that we do there. There's also a place you can chat with me if you have questions. You can book a call with me if you want to talk it through and make sure it's the right fit with you. And it's gearing up to be an awesome group. We've already had a bunch of guys sign up. And if you're looking for a change, if you're feeling that stagnation and you're like, I can't do this for another year, I need something different, this really is an engine, an opportunity to change that. And I love this idea of the masculine vortex and, this engine of, really love. I think, as you've put it before, the love that's generated in these groups is so refreshing just in a world that I often don't feel that so much. And I'm like, I feel into these moments and these connections I've witnessed these men create. And I'm like, okay, I have hope. I really just genuinely do when I see what's being built in groups like this. So definitely check it out and join us. And we look forward to, getting in the room with you and doing some deep work.
That's right. Jason, so great to be with you and just always a joy to be in your presence and, hoping you have a great next week or so. See you soon.
You too, man.
All right, brother.